Of the year at the Capitol. More than 1,500 supporters of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity filled the halls of the Capitol and the stairwells and the elevators. They were all lobbying lawmakers to restore education funding. And one of the organizers of this big to-do is my next guest. Billy Easton is the executive director of the Alliance for Quality Education. Billy, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me, Liz.
Big day.
It was a big day in many ways, and you know, it was a big day first because people from all over the state, every corner of the state, came to Albany with the simple demand: protect kids, not millionaires.
And created a traffic jam, because I was down there and getting up the stairs and down the stairs was difficult.
There was a bit of a traffic jam. It's a little harder to get around the Capitol since they closed down one of the entryways.
Right.
But it was an important day. This is how democracy works. People have to come and express their opinions. And I think what we saw, today was some real momentum happen around the renewal of the millionaire's tax and around protecting our school kids from cuts.
The millionaire's tax, this is actually fascinating, and timing is everything, of course, and at the Capitol, I don't think anything is coincidental. I don't know if it generally is because you had 1,500 or so yelling, chanting people wearing T-shirts at the Capitol, but we see movement, like you said. The threshold we're hearing about is going to be raised, so it would be really a bona fide millionaire's tax. Is that something that you guys are okay with?
Well, we are hearing the same reports you're hearing, that they're talking about moving the threshold up to actually starting at people making $1 million a year. That's still 75 to 85% of the revenue. We would rather see the threshold stay a little bit lower than that, but we agree with 75 to 85% of that. That's pretty darn good in our world, So the key thing here is that that's going to protect, that's still going to generate $3 to $4 billion a year in revenues. That's still going to allow for significant education restorations. And, let's take a look at how this has evolved. I remember being on your show at the very beginning of the year.
Yes, and I poo-pooed the whole thing. I'm very sorry.
Well, I feel like at that point in time we were practically a lone voice in the woods. AQE and a few other organizations. Parents really started, the grassroots, local people saying, hold on, this doesn't make sense. We can't make record cuts to schools and give tax cuts to the wealthiest New Yorkers. Then we saw local elected officials weigh in with a letter to the governor saying, no, this doesn't make sense. We need to protect our schools and communities. Then we saw 2/3 of the Senate Democrats get on board. Then we saw 70 Assembly Democrats say, we're totally committed to protecting our schools and we need the fair tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers. And then today, in the wake of all this momentum and with this big lobby day, Senator John Bonesick, a Republican from the Middletown area, announced that he is breaking ranks with the leadership of his conference and supporting a tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers and saying that a good portion of that money needs to be set aside for education.
Okay, here's the problem, though. John Bonesick has a history, and some of the viewers here, of course, are familiar with him. He is a pretty outspoken guy, independent. In fact, he was the only member of that Republican conference to call for Joe Bruno to step down from his leadership position when he revealed that he was being investigated, merely investigated, mind you, by the federal government, and turned out for outside influences, what he was doing with his consulting business. He ended up being, of course, indicted and found guilty on corruption charges that he's still fighting. John Bonesick, the only one, all right? He's not necessarily what we might call, I don't want to say not a team player, but not a sort of good soldier. He speaks out. He's out there on a limb. There's no indication at this point that all of the Republican conference is going to follow him.
I would call him the first one because we expect there will be more. If you take a look at the situation, you look in a Mark Grisanti's district from Buffalo and Niagara County or a Patty Ritchie's district from the Watertown, Oswego area, what do you see? You see huge cuts to schools because upstate schools take it on the chin more than anywhere else.
Right.
Okay? You see huge cuts to schools, and exactly where are the millionaires? It'd be interesting to have a search and find up in Patty Ritchie's district or up in Mark Grisanti's district and find the millionaires up there because they're not. Okay?
Well, there might be one or two, but many of them are in New York City, and also many of them are quite interested in the Committee to Save New York, right? And this is the pro-business, business-backed pro-Cuomo committee that is advertising in favor of the governor's plan, which is no new taxes. And the governor has made it quite clear that he feels that extending the millionaire's tax is, in fact, a new tax. So how do you get around him? Because he's got the the veto pen?
Well, we'll have to see what the governor's prepared to do. He does have the view that he's opposed to this tax. He's in a small minority of New Yorkers who feel that way. I don't even believe that most people who are in that income tax bracket feel that way. The only polling that's been done on income basis is people making over $100,000 a year. 61% of them support this tax. I haven't seen rallies of millionaires saying, "Oh, cut our taxes."
No, but let's be fair,
It's
though.
political
Millionaires,
donors.
okay, but millionaires like Tom Golisano, I mean,
Sure.
he's one of the ones that I keep coming back to, but
Sure.
he did indeed leave Western New York and make his living, his home base in Florida, and said, I'm saving some astronomical amount. I want to say it's $14,000, but I might be wrong. A day in taxes, be simply by moving my primary domicile to Florida. Also, I think Donald Trump also has spoken out. Now he's looking at running for president. I mean,
Yeah, but Tom Golisano, who was probably one of the biggest contributors to the greatest dysfunctional thing we ever saw in New York State political history.
You mean the Senate coup,
Yeah, the
right?
Senate
Okay.
coup. He engineered it. But he's the exception. In fact, the first year that this tax was in place, we saw a growth by 35,000 on the number of millionaires in New York State. I honestly think you have political donors and people who like to get in the press like Tom Golisano who are out there speaking about it. Most people, I believe, live in New York because they like living in New York. They think it's a great state. They want it to be great. Business is located here because if we have good schools and healthy communities, that's an incentive. Paying a fraction, and it's not a huge amount of money in additional taxes for people, it really is good for the state.
Okay, just because we're almost out of time, but we have to be clear. If, in fact, the governor vetoed something,